I'm Amy Bix, Professor of History at Iowa State University. I specialize in the history of technology, especially studying technology, work, and society. My research here analyzes how modern choices in Sabbath observance reflect tensions in work-life balance. I focus on how social and political inequities have fostered attempts to exert autonomy over information technology's role in everyday life and human presence. Over the past year and a half, the COVID-19 pandemic has served as a global experiment in forced changes, which temporarily disrupted conditions of life and work across social, economic, racial, and geographic boundaries. I argue that America's responses to COVID have both reflected and extended pre-existing tensions in the relationship between technology and work, life, and presence, with disturbing implications for the immediate future. My work for this project originated in studying the history of technology and Sabbath observance in modern Orthodox Jewish communities. Unlike ultra-Orthodox leaders who have thrown iPhones into bonfires, modern Orthodox Judaism defines itself as letting believers harmonize their faith with full engagement in mainstream society. 6 days of the week, modern Orthodox believers blend in with fellow Americans in texting, driving, and microwaving dinner. The calendar mediates the difference, as observant families switch to different rules for living on Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath. Numerous Torah verses set out the traditional mandate to honor a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. In 1951, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, "It is a day on which we are called upon to share on what is eternal in time. 6 days a week we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soul." Heschel described the Sabbath as a palace in time, intended to literally follow a different rhythm than the rest of the week. My previous research here examined how modern Orthodox Jewish families historically wrestled with how to apply Sabbath principles to a modernizing world. The traditional ban on kindling fires evolved into decisions to avoid using electric lights and appliances from Friday to Saturday sunset. Complex, intense debates parsed out the details of technological use in relation to religious law, examining whether using an e-reader violated rules against writing and erasing on Shabbat. My link to this PTP project came through the concept of the technology Sabbath, the popularized concept of choosing to take a temporary break from our modern hyper-connected information lifestyle. In 2003, the New York progressive Jewish nonprofit group Reboot created the Sabbath Manifesto, 10 principles for creatively reinterpreting traditional Shabbat observance for 21st century living. It was no coincidence that Reboot's modern Sabbath guidelines opened with "Avoid technology," urging instead a day to connect with loved ones, find silence, and give back. Reboot director Yoash Schlesinger described that advice as a step toward mental health, calling tech-free Sabbaths a Jewish solution to a universal problem of tech addiction. Prescribing weekly pauses from information overload, Reboot reasserted Shabbat as sacred time that could help restore work-life balance to an age of distraction and stress. Starting in 2010, Reboot helped enthusiasts organize a national day of unplugging that not coincidentally ran over the Jewish Friday to Saturday Sabbath. The Sabbath Manifesto app deployed digital tools to liberate people from digital entanglement, sending reminders to disconnect. The Chabad Lubavitch group Tech Tribe began organizing Friday night Island of Serenity dinners at the South by Southwest Festival and later at Comic-Con. Tech Tribe urged event attendees to escape the chaos by switching off their cell phones and enjoying relaxed face-to-face conversations for one evening. 300 participants joined Open Shabbat at South by Southwest 2016. The technology Sabbath concept soon caught on with Christians and Muslims who embedded it within their own religious practices as a strategy to set aside sacred time to build personal meaning and community. Celebrities such as Ariana Huffington and Katy Perry promoted shut-off Sundays. Others defined a secular Sabbath by selecting a weekday on which to unplug. Randy Zuckerberg and other Silicon Valley advocates linked enthusiasm for recharging to calls for slow living and mindfulness. Ironically, this mentality of unplugging went viral. Followers texted, tweeted, Facebooked, and YouTubed about the rewards of a tech fast or digital detox. Reports about apps, games, and social media designed to be addictive to keep users clicking underlined concern about time suck. But the key is that not everyone felt equally empowered to choose to follow a weekly technology Sabbath. While celebrities might announce that they were taking a restoring digital detox, hundreds of thousands of Americans remained tethered to cell phones and computers by explicit or implicit employment instruction. Cell phones and computer analysis facilitated business procedures of just-in-time scheduling, notorious in the service and retail world. Stores added or canceled shifts at the last minute or assigned workers to back-to-back late-night, early morning stints. Flexibility and efficiency for businesses meant precisely the opposite for low-wage employees, disproportionately women and minorities who had to juggle family and transportation challenges. At the other end of the economic spectrum, professionals experienced a different set of pressures. Especially for Americans whose health insurance depends on employment, fears of vulnerability could easily lead to competitive overwork. Always-on communication risked physical exhaustion, mental burnout, and family disruption. Political philosopher Kathy Weeks has diagnosed a valorization of work as tempting Americans in particular to build identities around employment, the quest to prove merit by visibly dedicating ever more hours to work. Management culture fetishized the quest to maximize performance, incorporated into Silicon Valley strategies of gamification and biohacking. Email, texting, and other instantaneous communication technologies insidiously spread organizational norms of 24/7 availability, resulting in what psychologist Larissa Barber has termed workplace telepressure. One study found that 41% of people expected coworkers to answer email within 1 hour, and another 36% expected a response in 4 hours. I will admit to having been guilty of similar impatience myself. Other studies have concluded that just checking work messages after hours damages employees' interpersonal relationships, as repeated micro-transitions between roles disrupt engagement with significant others. Stanford professor Jeffrey Pfeiffer argues that such toxic demands make US work shockingly inhumane, contributing to 120,000 extra deaths per year. By contrast, France passed laws in 2017 guaranteeing certain employees a right to disconnect at night, on Sundays, and on vacation. Volkswagen, Daimler, and other German employers instituted measures giving workers similar control over personal and family time. In the absence of such systemic limitation on off-hours work expectations, some Americans have embraced an individual or family technology Sabbath, hoping to regain at least some control over time. Advocates have promoted reducing screen time in favor of face-to-face conversations, nature walks, meditating, and pursuing hobbies. Weeks wrote, "It is important to recognize the potential social productivity of non-work, rather than dismissing it as an indolent, self-indulgent waste of time. The spirit of Shabbat underlined the human need for physically and psychologically rejuvenating time." In recent years, both scholars and ordinary observers have emphasized the growth of US economic inequality, dramatically illustrated in 2011's Occupy Wall Street movement and the Fight for $15 movement. I would emphasize that in addition to economic inequality, recent years have underlined an equally serious inequity exacerbated by the technologized workplace, a growing inequity in control over time. Observers of economic trends have warned of rising job polarization.
Did the sound go out for everyone? Okay.
Beyond polarization in income and wealth, 21st century gaps have also widened between those workers who enjoy more autonomy and those with little or no power. It was no coincidence that pre-COVID, the hottest high-tech firm job perks included unlimited paid vacation and the freedom to work remotely with no set hours. Again, these were the very same years in which Starbucks, The Gap, and other retailers became infamous for just-in-time scheduling, reassigning or canceling employee shifts on short notice. As a historian, I need to emphasize that tensions over workplace hours have deep roots. Facing workdays 12, 14, or more hours long, late 19th century unions voiced the demand 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and 8 hours for what we will. Early 20th century reformers convinced many states to pass laws to protect female workers in particular from extreme abuses of employment shifts. The amazing thing for a historian of work and technology in recent months has been to observe the abrupt upheaval in so-called normal life with the global spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the US in particular, much of the effect has spotlighted pre-existing tensions of inequality, precarity, and lack of control. In months when illness and death rates soared, so did the US stock market after initial panic. Food bank lines stretched as small businesses collapsed, taking down employment with them, even as crisis multiplied demand on so-called essential workers. Nurses, doctors, hospital technicians, and hospital service workers pulled extra shifts while frustrated by equipment shortages and desperate conditions that took a heavy toll on their own ranks. Disproportionate death rates among minorities underscored vulnerabilities among mass transit workers, grocery clerks, and others with their lives on the line. Meatpacking workers in Iowa, who had long faced physical harms, such as repetitive stress syndrome, now confronted deadly new contagion without sufficient protection. Meanwhile, pandemic gave some privileged Americans even greater flexibility to work from home, or even from well-appointed escape havens in sunny locations, themselves suffering from the collapse of tourism. School closures further underlined class, gender, and racial inequities in the control of time. Some families were able to relish having unexpected time to bond with new babies at home, in contrast to America's so-called normal lack of support for working parents. Others, especially mothers, faced extra COVID stress in trying to match employers' demands for unvarying productivity with supervising do-it-yourself homeschooling. Current headline debates over whether, when, and how to, quote, return to normal highlight questions about the future of work. Some observers have called for reframing assumptions, emphasizing that virtual work eliminates the expense, exhaustion, and environmental toll of commuting. Some anticipate and welcome the end of a face-to-face office culture. They suggest, for example, that enabling tech workers to operate productively from small towns could relieve the housing crunch and cost of the Bay Area while revitalizing deindustrialized regions elsewhere in the country. But again, such solutions are not simple and will not happen automatically. The challenges of COVID homeschooling have dramatized how geographically and economically disadvantaged communities still face ongoing difficulties in connectivity. And a hollowing out of urban centers would accelerate obsolescence of employment linked to population density, as in restaurant business models that cater to daytime office workers. At this moment, I believe that the trend is likely to, in fact, worsen the pre-pandemic polarization of control over time. Workers in the most sought-after fields are likely to become increasingly enabled to negotiate their choice of hours and location. Many companies and organizations may honor at least some such requests in order to keep what they consider the best workers. Remote work promises to reduce costs of maintaining large offices while letting corporations claim credit for environmental responsibility and representing the cutting edge of future employment. Yet for many of us, the Groundhog Day feeling of days blending together on Zoom has reaffirmed the value of face-to-face interactions. Many K-12 parents, university students, and workers demand a return to normal. That in turn puts pressure on other workers and managers to bring offices back to pre-pandemic face-to-face conditions. If nothing else, I believe that COVID-19 has at least served to interrupt what we call technological determinism, the simple assumption that new technologies emerge and then compel humans to adopt their use regardless of implication. The 1933 Chicago World's Fair used the slogan, "Science finds, industry applies, man conforms." The history of technology field aims to fight such assumptions of technological determinism by emphasizing the human and social complexities in our use of technology. COVID experience has underlined the power of remote connections, the ability to reach out to family and friends when physical contact was forbidden, and the chance for many to keep regular workplace operations running, even amidst chaos, to provide some sense of stability in crucial areas of life. Yet COVID experience has also underlined the fact that we do not yet have robots to replace nurses, bus drivers, meat packers, or others who were thus forced into life-endangering exposure in occupations that require face-to-face contact. COVID has underlined that while in-person schooling and in-person office work bring multiple challenges, including bullying and sexual harassment, the bottom line is that human presence still matters. I know I will be more grateful than ever to walk into a classroom this fall, I hope, after engaging with students through screens for more than a year. But again, inequities loom. How will pandemic fallout affect adjunct faculty, already marginalized, and the most precarious of all college students, those already facing personal and economic obstacles to continuing their education? COVID has confronted more Americans than ever with questions about the future of work in a digital age. The ultimate goal should be for a deliberate social, economic, and personal reboot. Conscious reinspection can seek to preserve positive dimensions of pandemic transformations, such as environmental benefits. Meanwhile, crisis injustices should revitalize consideration of health insurance and other economic support for the most vulnerable, plus other measures to support well-being and autonomy. Inequity is never easy to fight, particularly under crisis conditions. Yet in the end, by having had so-called regular conditions of work and life so abruptly altered for everyone, we have learned that our physical and psychological health still turn on having a positive human presence. After days spent on Zoom, the option of enjoying a long technology Sabbath appears more tempting than ever, at least for those of us who are privileged to enjoy that option.